Hey everyone, today we're going to dive into something that sits quietly in a museum in Athens, looking like nothing more than corroded bronze fragments. It's called the Antikythera Mechanism, and according to everything we thought we knew about the ancient world, it shouldn't exist. The story begins with Greek sponge divers in 1900 working the treacherous waters around Antikythera, a small rocky island between Crete and the mainland. These weren't casual weekend divers. They made their living descending to depths that would challenge modern scuba equipment, holding their breath for minutes at a time while searching the seafloor for the natural sponges that wealthy Europeans prized for their baths. But before we surface from this mystery and head down to that ancient wreck, if you're enjoying these deep dives into history's strangest puzzles, hit that subscribe button, like this video. We explore the impossible here. And if you know someone who loves questioning what they thought they knew about the ancient world, share this one with them. Captain Dimitrios Kontos was 150 feet down when he spotted the dark outline of a ship's hull against the white sand. Ancient wrecks weren't unusual in these waters. The Mediterranean had been swallowing ships for thousands of years, but this one was different. The cargo scattered across the seafloor told the story of serious wealth. Marble statues lay broken but still recognizable, their classical Greek features staring up through 2 millennia of accumulated sediment. Bronze figurines, some still gleaming despite their long submersion, spoke of the kind of luxury goods that only the wealthiest Romans could afford. The divers worked for months to bring up the treasure. Life-size bronze horses, delicate glass vessels somehow intact after 2,000 years underwater, inscribed pottery that would later help date the wreck to somewhere around the 1st century BC. This was clearly a merchant vessel carrying the kind of classical art that Roman collectors coveted, Greek masterpieces being shipped to decorate Roman villas. But mixed among these beautiful expected artifacts were several chunks of what looked like corroded bronze waste. Green and brown masses of metal, so damaged by salt water that their original shape was impossible to determine. Nothing remarkable about that, really. Bronze corrodes badly in seawater, and any ancient wreck is going to yield its share of unidentifiable metal fragments. The divers brought them up along with everything else, and the Greek government claimed the entire find for the National Archaeological Museum in Athens. Worth thinking about what happens next, because it reveals something important about how we approach things that don't fit our expectations. These corroded lumps sat in museum storage for 2 years. 2 years during which scholars were publishing papers about the magnificent statues and inscribed pottery, building careers around artifacts that confirmed everything they already knew about Roman taste and Greek artistic achievement. The bronze fragments, irrelevant debris, not worth the time of serious researchers focused on objects that fit established patterns of ancient civilization. Then in 1902, archaeologist Valerios Staes was cataloguing the fragments when something made him pause. As he handled one of the larger pieces, some of the thick corrosion flaked away, revealing something that shouldn't have been there. A gear tooth, perfectly formed, mathematically precise, cut into bronze with an accuracy that belonged to clockwork, not ancient metalwork. Staes kept working at the corrosion, probably unsure of what he was seeing. More gear teeth emerged, then the curved edge of what was unmistakably a gear wheel, with spacing between the teeth that showed careful calculation. This wasn't random metal damage or the kind of simple mechanical parts you might find on an ancient ship. This was precision engineering. The moment Staes recognized those gear teeth, he was looking at something that fundamentally challenged the timeline of human technological development. Ancient peoples weren't supposed to have precision mechanical devices. They had hammers and chisels, pottery wheels, and simple levers. The complex gear systems that enable sophisticated machinery weren't supposed to appear until the medieval period at the earliest. What Staes had found was evidence of a technology that, according to established archaeological understanding, was about 1,500 years too early. How scholars reacted gives us a glimpse into how official bodies manage evidence that challenges the norm. Most experts simply dismissed the find as too anachronistic to be authentic. Some suggested the gears were from a much later period that had somehow become mixed with the ancient artifacts. Perhaps a medieval clock that had fallen into the wreck site centuries after the original ship sank. Others proposed that modern contamination had occurred during the excavation process. These explanations shared a common thread. They preserved the comfortable narrative of steady technological progress. They kept the ancient world safely limited to simple tools, and the medieval world safely limited to basic mechanical devices. The alternative, that first-century Greeks had been building sophisticated gear mechanisms, was simply too disruptive to existing models of how human knowledge develops over time. But there was a problem with these reassuring theories. The marine growth patterns on the gears matched those on the unquestionably ancient artifacts. The bronze corrosion showed the same chemical signatures as the statues and figurines. The metallurgy was consistent with 1st century BC techniques. Whatever this device was, it had been underwater for the same 2,000 years as the wine amphorae and marble sculptures. The evidence was forcing an uncomfortable conclusion. These gears belonged to the ancient world, whether that made sense or not. For the next half-century, the Antikythera fragments remained in Athens, occasionally studied but largely set aside. A few scholars published tentative papers suggesting the pieces might be parts of an astrolabe or some kind of primitive calculating device. But these theories couldn't account for the mechanical complexity visible even through the heavy corrosion. Makes you wonder how many other anomalous artifacts are sitting in museum collections right now, catalogued as curiosities because they don't fit our preconceptions about what ancient peoples could accomplish. How often do we encounter evidence that challenges established timelines, only to find ways to explain it away rather than revise our understanding? The Antikythera fragments were telling a story that no one particularly wanted to hear, that the technological capabilities of the ancient world might have been far more sophisticated than our models allow, that the neat progression from primitive to advanced that we use to organise human history might be more fiction than fact. What's particularly unsettling about this discovery is how it forces us to confront the possibility that technological sophistication and technological survival are two entirely different things. Just because we can't find evidence of advanced ancient technologies doesn't mean they never existed. It might mean they existed in forms too fragile to survive, or in contexts we're not looking at, or in ways our archaeological methods aren't designed to recognise. The Antikythera Mechanism raises the uncomfortable question of whether our understanding of ancient capabilities is based on evidence, or on the absence of evidence that we've mistaken for evidence of absence. Whether the story we tell about steady technological progress reflects reality, or simply reflects the limitations of what time has preserved for us to find. This device was clearly not some crude experiment or lucky accident. The precision of the gear cutting suggests an established tradition of mechanical engineering. The mathematical accuracy required for the gear ratios points to sophisticated theoretical knowledge. The miniaturization of the components indicates a level of craftsmanship that took generations to develop. Still, we have no other examples, no descriptions in ancient texts of similar devices, no archaeological evidence of the workshops where such mechanisms were produced. No indication that this technology was anything other than a complete anomaly in the historical record, which leaves us with some genuinely puzzling possibilities worth considering. Either this device represents an isolated burst of technological genius that appeared from nowhere and disappeared without a trace, or it represents the sole surviving example of capabilities that were more widespread than we've imagined. Either the ancient world occasionally produced impossible devices that defied the technological limitations of their time, or our understanding of those technological limitations is simply wrong. The Antikythera Mechanism forces us to acknowledge that the past might be far stranger than we're comfortable admitting, that beneath our neat categories of ancient, medieval, and modern technological development, there might be gaps in our knowledge large enough to hide entire traditions of sophisticated engineering. Tonight we're going to explore what this impossible device actually was, how it might have worked, and what its existence suggests about the knowledge that flourished and vanished in the ancient world. But perhaps more importantly, we're going to sit with the unsettling possibility that human technological capability hasn't followed the smooth upward trajectory we like to imagine. Sometimes the most important discoveries are the ones that make us question not just what we know, but what we think we know about knowing itself. To understand what the Antikythera Mechanism represents, we need to step back and consider the world that created it. This wasn't the classical Greece of Socrates and Plato that most people picture when they think of ancient philosophy. By the time this device was built, we're looking at something called the Hellenistic period, roughly the 3rd through 1st centuries BC, and it was an entirely different kind of civilization. The Hellenistic world emerged from the conquests of Alexander the Great, who had died in 323 BC, leaving behind an empire that stretched from Egypt to India. When his generals divided up this vast territory, they created kingdoms that were Greek in culture but cosmopolitan in outlook. Alexandria in Egypt, Rhodes in the Aegean, Pergamon in Asia Minor. These became centres of learning that drew scholars from across the known world. Alexandria deserves particular attention because it represents something we rarely associate with the ancient world: systematic, well-funded scientific research. The Library of Alexandria wasn't just a collection of scrolls. It was an institution where mathematicians, astronomers, engineers, and natural philosophers worked together, supported by royal patronage that gave them freedom to pursue knowledge for its own sake. Worth thinking about what this environment made possible. When you have the brightest minds from different cultures collaborating in a single location, with access to accumulated knowledge from Babylon, Egypt, Greece, and India, and with sufficient funding to build experimental devices, you create conditions that might produce technological breakthroughs we wouldn't expect from any individual ancient culture. The Hellenistic Greeks developed a practical approach to knowledge that differed sharply from earlier philosophical traditions. Instead of viewing the physical world as an imperfect reflection of ideal forms, they became deeply interested in measuring, calculating, and modelling natural phenomena with mechanical devices. They wanted to build things that worked, not just contemplate eternal truths. Consider Archimedes of Syracuse, working in the 3rd century BC. Most people know him for his supposed eureka moment in the bath, but his actual achievements were far more substantial. He calculated pi to remarkable accuracy, developed the mathematical principles of leverage, invented the Archimedes screw for moving water, and designed complex mechanical devices for defending Syracuse against Roman siege. But here's what's particularly interesting. Roman writers describe Archimedes building mechanical spheres that showed the motions of the sun, moon, and planets. Cicero, writing in the 1st century BC, mentions seeing one of these devices and describes how it accurately reproduced celestial movements through the turning of a single handle. Cicero wasn't describing this as some miraculous or impossible feat. He was writing about it as an example of impressive but achievable Greek engineering. These mechanical planetariums were apparently well known enough in the Roman world that Cicero could reference them casually, assuming his readers would understand what he meant. This suggests that sophisticated astronomical mechanisms weren't rare experimental devices. They were established enough to be mentioned in literature without detailed explanation. Hipparchus of Rhodes, working in the 2nd century BC, made astronomical observations of stunning precision. He discovered the precession of the equinoxes, the slow wobble in Earth's rotation that takes 26,000 years to complete a full cycle. He calculated the length of the solar year to within 6.5 minutes of the modern value. He created the first comprehensive star catalogue, mapping over 850 stars with positional accuracy that wouldn't be improved upon for centuries. But Hipparchus wasn't working with crude instruments. Ancient sources describe him using sophisticated observational equipment and developing mathematical techniques for predicting celestial events with remarkable accuracy. The level of precision in his work suggests access to mechanical devices capable of very fine measurements, exactly the kind of instruments that the Antikythera Mechanism represents. Posidonius, working slightly later, calculated the circumference of Earth using the difference in star positions between Alexandria and Rhodes. His measurement came within a few % of the actual value, a feat that required not just theoretical understanding but also precise instruments for measuring angles and positions. The workshop traditions of this period deserve special attention because they challenge our assumptions about how ancient technology developed. In places like Rhodes and Alexandria, we see evidence of collaboration between theoretical mathematicians and practical craftsmen. Scholars who understood complex astronomical calculations worked directly with metalworkers who could translate mathematical relationships into precisely cut gears. This wasn't the modern separation between pure science and applied engineering. The same individuals who calculated planetary orbits also designed the mechanical devices to model those movements. They understood both the mathematics of gear ratios and the practical techniques needed to cut bronze teeth with sufficient accuracy to make those ratios function properly. Hero of Alexandria, working in the 1st century AD, provides a glimpse of just how sophisticated this practical engineering had become. He built steam-powered devices, automatic doors triggered by fires lit in nearby temples, programmable mechanical theatres that performed entire plays through clockwork mechanisms, and coin-operated machines that dispensed holy water. Hero's inventions weren't just clever tricks. They demonstrated mastery of pneumatics, precision metalworking, gear trains, and mechanical programming. His work suggests that by the 1st century AD, Greek engineers had developed techniques that wouldn't reappear in European workshops until the late medieval period. But here's what makes this historical context particularly relevant to the Antikythera mechanism. These weren't isolated individual achievements. The sophisticated devices described by Hero, the astronomical instruments used by Hipparchus, the mechanical spheres built by Archimedes, they all point to an established technological tradition. A community of craftsmen and scholars who had developed techniques for building complex mechanical devices over generations. The precision metalworking required for the Antikythera mechanism didn't appear overnight. The mathematical knowledge needed to calculate its gear ratios wasn't the work of a single genius. This device represents the culmination of a technological tradition that had been developing for centuries in the Hellenistic world. Worth considering what this implies about the broader technological landscape of the ancient Mediterranean. If one merchant ship carried a sophisticated mechanical computer, how many similar devices were in circulation? If the precision engineering tradition was advanced enough to produce the Antikythera mechanism, what other applications were these techniques used for? Unlike the earlier Greek world, the Hellenistic kingdoms gave real weight to applied, hands-on knowledge. Ptolemaic Egypt funded engineering projects alongside philosophical research. The kingdom of Pergamon competed with Alexandria to attract the most skilled craftsmen and scholars. Rhodes became famous for its precision, astronomical instruments and mechanical devices. This was a world where theoretical knowledge and practical application reinforced each other, where mathematical discoveries led directly to mechanical innovations, and where mechanical devices enabled more precise observations that fed back into mathematical understanding. A feedback loop between theory and practice that produced technological capabilities we're only beginning to appreciate. The economic context matters too. These Hellenistic kingdoms were wealthy enough to support extended research and development. They had trade networks that connected craftsmen from different regions, allowing techniques to spread and improve through cross-cultural exchange. They had political stability that enabled multi-generational workshops to develop and refine specialized skills. But this technological sophistication existed in a narrow window of historical time. The Hellenistic period ended when Rome completed its conquest of the eastern Mediterranean in the 1st century BC. The Romans were practical engineers in their own right, but they approached technology differently than the Greeks. They were more interested in large-scale infrastructure projects, roads, aqueducts, amphitheatres, than in precision instruments and mechanical computation devices. Under Roman rule, the Greek scientific communities gradually dispersed. Scholars became tutors to wealthy Roman families rather than researchers supported by royal patronage. The workshops that had developed precision metalworking techniques either adapted to Roman demands for different kinds of devices, or simply closed as their specialized knowledge became economically irrelevant. This cultural transition helps explain why devices like the Antikythera mechanism disappeared from the historical record. It wasn't that the knowledge was lost catastrophically, it was that the social and economic conditions that supported such sophisticated engineering gradually eroded. The communities where theoretical astronomers worked alongside precision craftsmen simply ceased to exist. It was probably during the closing phase of this remarkable era that the Antikythera mechanism was built, a time when technological brilliance flourished, while the political world that fostered it was strained by Rome's advance. It represents not just individual genius, but the culmination of centuries of collaborative development between mathematicians, astronomers, and mechanical engineers working in conditions that would never quite exist again. It raises the question of what other technologies might have briefly thrived in certain eras, only to disappear once the cultures that nurtured them collapsed. Perhaps much of what we call impossible for the ancients simply reflects how little we grasp about what different social and economic worlds once allowed. The world that built the Antikythera mechanism was one where precision mechanical engineering was not only possible, but apparently sophisticated enough to produce devices of startling complexity. That world ended not because the knowledge was inherently unsustainable, but because the particular combination of intellectual curiosity, royal funding, international collaboration, and practical craftsmanship that made it possible proved historically fragile. When we look at those corroded bronze gears, we're seeing the last surviving evidence of technological capabilities that took centuries to develop and decades to disappear completely. For 50 years after Valerius Stius first spotted those gear teeth, the Antikythera fragments remained something of an embarrassment to classical archaeology. Too strange to ignore, too problematic to properly investigate. Scholars would occasionally publish cautious papers suggesting the pieces might be parts of an astrolabe or some kind of primitive calculating device. But these theories always felt inadequate when confronted with the actual complexity visible in the corroded bronze. Then in 1951, a British physicist named Derek de Solla Price encountered the fragments during a visit to Athens. Price wasn't an archaeologist. He was a historian of science with a particular interest in precision instruments and medieval clockwork. When he saw the Antikythera pieces, he didn't see corroded junk or mysterious ancient debris. He saw the remains of a sophisticated mechanical device that deserved serious technical analysis. Price became obsessed with understanding what the mechanism had actually been. He spent years studying the fragments, measuring every visible gear tooth, analysing the bronze composition, documenting inscription fragments, mapping corrosion patterns. But the heavy marine corrosion made it impossible to see the internal structure that would reveal how the device had functioned as a complete system. The breakthrough came with X-ray photography in the early 1970s. When Price arranged to have the fragments radiographed at the National Research Foundation in Athens, the images revealed something that changed everything. Hidden beneath the thick green corrosion was a complex system of interlocking gears, not just a few simple wheels, but an intricate mechanical computer with at least 30 separate bronze gears arranged in multiple layers. What the X-rays uncovered were gear trains of breathtaking complexity. Gear wheels within gear wheels, some no larger than coins, with teeth cut to tolerances that wouldn't be achieved again in European workshops until the development of precision clockwork in the 18th century. The miniaturization alone was remarkable. Someone had managed to create a portable device that contained the mathematical relationships governing celestial mechanics. Price could see that the largest gear wheel had 223 teeth, while a smaller wheel meshing with it had exactly 64 teeth. These weren't random numbers. They represented a calculated ratio designed to model specific astronomical relationships. Other gear combinations showed similarly precise mathematical planning, with tooth counts that matched known astronomical cycles. But analysing static X-ray images only revealed so much about how the mechanism had actually operated. Price began the painstaking work of understanding not just what gears were present, but how they had worked together to perform calculations. This meant diving deep into ancient Greek astronomical knowledge and comparing it with the mechanical relationships visible in the bronze fragments. Encoded in the gears was an astronomical precision that clashed with accepted ideas of what ancient science could achieve. The main drive wheel showed a relationship of 254:19, exactly the ratio between solar years and lunar months that Greek astronomers had calculated to predict when lunar calendars would drift out of alignment with solar seasons. This wasn't an approximation or a rough estimate. It was mathematically precise to several decimal places. Other gear combinations encoded equally sophisticated knowledge. Price found evidence of wheels calibrated to the Saros cycle, the 18-year, 11-day, 8-hour period after which eclipses repeat their patterns in the same sequence. The precision required to calculate this cycle involves understanding not just when eclipses occur, but the specific viewing angles and geographic locations where they'll be visible. Even more intriguing were gear ratios that seemed to track planetary movements. Ancient astronomers had observed that Mars, Venus and Mercury follow complex paths through the zodiac, sometimes appearing to move backward against the starfield in patterns that repeat over multi-year cycles. The Antikythera Mechanism contained gear trains that could model these planetary retrograde motions with mechanical precision. The inscriptions covering the bronze surfaces provided additional layers of complexity. As Price worked with improved lighting and magnification, he could read fragments of Greek text that included technical astronomical terms, numerical tables, and what appeared to be operating instructions for the device. These weren't decorative markings, they were the user manual for a scientific instrument. Reading through these inscriptions revealed something particularly striking about how the device was intended to function in daily use. The The text included specific instructions for setting initial dial positions, reading various scales, and interpreting the positions of multiple pointers. This suggested the mechanism wasn't a display piece or theoretical model, but a practical tool designed for regular operation by people who understood its astronomical functions. In the sharpness of the carved text lay evidence of meticulous preparation and design. The text had been engraved into the bronze plates before final assembly, requiring the craftsman to know exactly where each word would be positioned relative to the mechanical components. Every inscription had to align perfectly with its corresponding gear, pointer, or scale. This level of coordination suggests manufacturing processes far more systematic than the experimental workshops we typically associate with ancient technology. Price's analysis revealed evidence of quality control that was almost modern in its rigour. Gear teeth showed uniform spacing within tolerances measured in fractions of millimetres. Some wheels had been adjusted or repaired, with tool marks indicating systematic methods for fine-tuning the mechanical relationships. The bronze alloy composition was consistent throughout the device, suggesting careful metallurgical control rather than the variable quality typical of ancient metalwork. What it took to design those gear ratios was mathematical knowledge of a sophistication historians usually associate with far later eras. The device didn't just track simple astronomical cycles, it automatically calculated variations in lunar and planetary speeds that require understanding of elliptical orbits and gravitational influences. Ancient Greek astronomers had observed that the Moon doesn't travel through its orbit at constant speed. It moves faster when closer to Earth and slower when farther away. Accounting for these variations mathematically requires sophisticated geometry and careful observation over many lunar cycles. Yet the Antikythera mechanism contained gear systems that modelled these speed changes through mechanical analog computation. To mirror the Moon's shifting pace, the device employed what modern engineers call a pin and slot system, a clever way of generating variable gear ratios. As the mechanism operated, a pin attached to one gear would slide back and forth in an elongated slot cut into another wheel, causing the output speed to vary in precisely the pattern needed to model lunar motion. This mechanical solution to the problem of non-uniform celestial motion represents analog computing techniques that weren't supposed to be invented until the 20th century. Price's investigation also revealed evidence of the broader technological context that had made such a device possible. The tool marks on the gear teeth showed systematic cutting patterns that suggested standardized manufacturing techniques. The bronze work demonstrated mastery of alloy composition, precision casting, and fine metalworking that required generations of workshop development to perfect. But perhaps most significant was the evidence that this device wasn't unique. Price found traces of repair work that indicated the mechanism had been used extensively and maintained over time. There were also subtle variations in manufacturing techniques between different components, suggesting that multiple craftsmen had worked on the device using shared but individually refined methods. This pointed to something that made mainstream archaeologists deeply uncomfortable: the possibility that the Antikythera mechanism represented not an isolated achievement, but a mature technological tradition. The precision and sophistication visible in the device suggested that building such mechanisms was an established craft, practiced by specialists who had spent decades perfecting their techniques. He spent 30 years studying the Antikythera fragments, publishing increasingly detailed analyses of their mechanical and astronomical functions. Each new insight revealed additional layers of sophistication that pushed ancient Greek technological capabilities further beyond conventional expectations. By the time of his death in 1983, he had established that the device was genuinely ancient, genuinely sophisticated, and genuinely problematic for standard models of technological development. The implications of Price's work extended far beyond a single archaeological artifact. If the ancient Greeks had possessed the theoretical knowledge and practical skills needed to build mechanical computers, what other technologies might they have developed that simply haven't survived? If precision gear cutting and analog computation were within their capabilities, how much of what we consider uniquely modern innovation might actually represent rediscovery of ancient techniques? His analysis transformed the Antikythera mechanism from an archaeological curiosity into a technological time bomb. The device wasn't just evidence of unexpected ancient sophistication, it was proof that our timeline of human technological development might be fundamentally incomplete. that the neat progression from primitive to advanced that organises our understanding of history might reflect the limitations of our evidence rather than the limitations of ancient capabilities. The bronze gears that had puzzled archaeologists for decades were revealing themselves to be components of a device more sophisticated than anything built in the subsequent 15 centuries. A mechanical computer that could perform astronomical calculations with accuracy that wouldn't be matched until the development of modern scientific instruments. Worth considering what this says about the nature of technological progress itself. The Antikythera Mechanism suggests that human innovation doesn't always follow the steady upward trajectory we like to imagine. Sometimes sophisticated technologies emerge, flourish, and then disappear so completely that later civilizations have to rediscover capabilities that were once commonplace. Price's decades of investigation had decoded a message from the ancient world that challenged everything archaeologists thought they knew about the technological limitations of pre-modern societies. The corroded bronze fragments were forcing a fundamental question. How much about ancient capabilities have we simply gotten wrong? Derek D. Solar Price's work had established that the Antikythera Mechanism was genuinely ancient and genuinely sophisticated, but his X-ray images from the 1970s could only reveal so much. The fragments remained largely opaque, their internal structure visible but not detailed enough to understand exactly how the complete device had functioned. For decades, researchers worked with educated guesses about missing components and theoretical reconstructions based on incomplete information. Then the 21st century brought imaging technologies that revolutionized the investigation. In 2005, an international team led by Tony Freeth brought portable CT scanning equipment directly to the National Archaeological Museum in Athens. Instead of static X-ray photographs, they could now create three-dimensional models of the gear trains hidden inside the corroded bronze, seeing the mechanism's internal structure in unprecedented detail. From the CT scans emerged a level of intricacy beyond anything Price had envisioned. The device contained not 30 but at least 40 separate gear wheels, arranged in sophisticated trains that could perform multiple astronomical calculations simultaneously. Some gears were so small and precisely cut that they challenged the resolution limits of the scanning equipment. Others showed evidence of deliberate design modifications that suggested the original builders had tested and refined the mechanism's performance through actual use. But the real breakthrough came with new surface imaging techniques that could read inscriptions invisible to conventional photography. Reflectance, transformation. Imaging used multiple light sources to reveal text fragments that had been completely obscured by corrosion and marine growth. Suddenly, researchers could read operating instructions, astronomical tables, and technical specifications that had been hidden for 2,000 years. Such inscriptions transformed understanding of what the device had actually been designed to accomplish. This wasn't just an astronomical calculator. It was a comprehensive modelling system for multiple aspects of ancient timekeeping and celestial prediction. The mechanism could coordinate solar calendars with lunar months, predict eclipses years in advance, track planetary positions through the zodiac, and even indicate when Olympic Games would be held. The front face of the mechanism functioned as a mechanical representation of the Greek astronomical universe. A large bronze dial contained a zodiac calendar that tracked the sun's annual journey through the 12 constellations. Concentric pointer systems showed the positions of the moon and likely several planets as they moved through their complex orbital patterns. Users could set the mechanism to any date and read the astronomical conditions for that time directly from the dial positions. But the back panels revealed even more sophisticated functions. The upper dial modelled the Metonic cycle, the 19-year period discovered by the Greek astronomer Meton, during which lunar months returned to the same relationship with solar years. This cycle was crucial for maintaining calendar systems that needed to account for the fact that 12 lunar months don't quite equal one solar year. The mechanism could automatically calculate when intercalary months needed to be added to keep lunar calendars aligned with seasonal changes. On the lower back, a dial tracked the Saros cycle to predict eclipses. This 18-year, 11-day, 8-hour period represents one of the most sophisticated calculations in ancient astronomy. Predicting eclipses requires understanding not just when the Sun, Earth and Moon align, but also accounting for the slight tilt in the Moon's orbital plane that determines whether an alignment actually produces a visible eclipse from any specific location. The Antikythera Mechanism didn't just calculate when eclipses would occur, it indicated what type of eclipse would be visible, at what time of day, and from which geographic regions. The precision required for these predictions involves mathematical relationships that most people assume weren't understood until the development of modern celestial mechanics. Even more remarkable was evidence that the mechanism modelled the elliptical nature of lunar motion. Ancient Greek astronomers had observed that the moon doesn't travel through its orbit at constant speed, moving faster when closer to Earth and slower when farther away. Accounting for this variation mathematically requires understanding that would later be formalised in Kepler's laws of planetary motion. This challenge was overcome through a clever pin and slot mechanism, where one gear drove another with a variable link that sped up and slowed down exactly in step with lunar motion. This analog computer was performing calculations about orbital mechanics that wouldn't be properly understood again until the 17th century. Achieving this level of compact design defies expectations of what ancient engineers were thought capable of. Some gear wheels measured less than 1 inch in diameter, but contained over 50 precisely cut teeth. The spacing between teeth had to be accurate to fractions of a degree, variations that would accumulate over time and throw off the mechanism's calculations. Achieving this precision required cutting techniques, measuring methods, and quality control systems that suggest far more sophisticated workshop practices than we typically associate with ancient metalworking. Within the bronze alloy appeared clear signs of metallurgical expertise beyond expectations. Analysis showed the metal had been carefully formulated to provide exactly the right combination of hardness and workability for precision gear cutting. Too soft, and the teeth would wear quickly under operation. Too hard, and they would be impossible to shape accurately with the tools available in the ancient world. The craftsmen had solved this material science problem through systematic experimentation with copper and tin ratios. On the gear teeth, tool marks revealed insights into how the mechanism was made, insights that rivaled the wonder of its operation. The cutting patterns showed evidence of systematic techniques for achieving uniform tooth spacing without modern measuring equipment. Some gears had been reworked or adjusted after initial cutting, indicating quality control processes that caught and corrected manufacturing variations before final assembly. The inscriptions revealed that the mechanism served multiple calendar systems simultaneously. Greek civil calendars, astronomical calendars, Olympic Games schedules, and eclipse prediction tables were all coordinated through the device's various dial systems. This wasn't just a scientific instrument, it was a comprehensive timekeeping system that could satisfy the practical needs of anyone who needed to coordinate activities across different calendar traditions. Instruction fragments gave a glimpse into how the mechanism was intended for daily use. Users would set the main drive dial to a specific date, then read astronomical and calendar information from various pointer positions on the front and back panels. The mechanism could answer questions like, what phase will the moon be in next month? When is the next eclipse visible from roads? What constellation will the sun be in during the upcoming harvest? How many days until the next Olympic Games? Only by looking at what the device was actually calculating does the full complexity of its mathematics become clear. Solar years contain 365 and approximately 1/4 days. Lunar months average 29.5 days. The moon's orbital speed varies by about 13% between its fastest and slowest points. Eclipse cycles depend on the 18-degree tilt between the moon's orbit and the Earth's orbital plane around the sun. Coordinating all these variables mechanically requires gear ratios calculated to multiple decimal places. The Antikythera Mechanism performed these computations automatically through bronze wheels, whose tooth counts encoded complex mathematical relationships. Turn the main drive wheel, and every astronomical variable adjusted itself appropriately, maintaining accurate relative positions indefinitely. The engineering solutions visible in the mechanism reveal problem-solving approaches that wouldn't reappear in European technology for over a millennium. The variable gear ratio system that modelled changing lunar speed represents analog computing techniques that weren't formally developed until the 20th century. The multi-layer gear trains that performed parallel calculations anticipate mechanical approaches that characterize precision clockwork centuries later. Efforts to reconstruct the mechanism today have shown just how demanding the original manufacturing process must have been. Contemporary clockmakers working with modern tools struggle to achieve the precision visible in the ancient bronze gears. The tooth cutting requires techniques that push hand tools to their absolute limits. The assembly process demands understanding of how dozens of components interact mechanically to produce the correct astronomical outputs. These reconstruction efforts have also revealed something unexpected about the mechanism's daily operation. When properly adjusted, the device runs remarkably smoothly, with gear trains that mesh cleanly and pointers that move in fluid, continuous motions. This isn't the rough approximation you might expect from ancient engineering. It's precision machinery that operates with the smoothness of modern clockwork. Matching its calculations with historical records makes the mechanism's precision seem even more remarkable. Researchers have used reconstructed versions to predict eclipse dates and planetary positions for ancient periods, then compared these mechanical calculations with documented observations from Greek and Babylonian astronomers. The matches are precise enough to suggest that the mechanism's predictions would have been reliable for decades of continuous use, but perhaps most unsettling is what the device reveals about the gap between ancient knowledge and ancient survival. The Antikythera Mechanism demonstrates that first-century Greeks possessed theoretical understanding and practical skills that we associate with much later periods of history. They could perform complex astronomical calculations, engineer precision mechanical devices, and integrate multiple calendar systems through analog computation. Still, almost all evidence of these capabilities vanished from the historical record. We have no other surviving examples of similar devices. No ancient texts describe the manufacturing techniques needed to build precision gear systems. No archaeological sites preserve the workshops where such mechanisms were produced. The sophisticated technological tradition that created the Antikythera Mechanism disappeared so completely that we rediscovered its existence only through one accidentally preserved example. This preservation anomaly forces uncomfortable questions about what we actually know versus what we think we know about ancient technological capabilities. If devices this sophisticated were being built in the 1st century BC, how many other examples corroded away completely over the subsequent millennia? How much of what we consider impossible for ancient peoples reflects the limitations of archaeological preservation, rather than the limitations of ancient engineering? What the gears encode in their mathematics suggests expertise accumulated over a long span of time. You don't achieve accuracy measured in decimal places through individual insight. You need institutional memory, systematic observation, and collaborative refinement between theorists and craftsmen working over extended periods. This device represents the culmination of a technological tradition, not the experimental achievement of isolated genius. Which raises the question of what happened to that tradition. The precision manufacturing techniques, the astronomical calculation methods, the mechanical engineering knowledge, all of it vanished from European civilization for over 1,000 years after the Hellenistic period ended. The technologies that made the Antikythera Mechanism possible didn't just decline gradually, they disappeared as if they had never existed. Each new analysis brings to light further aspects of the mechanism's remarkable design. Recent studies have identified gear trains that may have tracked the positions of all 5 planets visible to ancient astronomers. Others have found evidence of calendar systems that coordinated Egyptian, Babylonian and Greek timekeeping traditions through mechanical calculation. Each new discovery pushes ancient technological capabilities further beyond conventional expectations. This device compels a rethink not only of what the Greeks were capable of building, but also of how we measure technological progress itself. Bronze gears and mechanical computation achieved what we now rely on digital electronics and processors to do. 2 very different methods, yet remarkably similar capabilities, divided by 2,000 years. The Antikythera Mechanism didn't emerge from a vacuum. As modern research revealed the device's sophisticated functions, scholars began searching ancient texts for any mention of similar mechanical devices. What they found suggests that precision astronomical instruments were far more common in the Hellenistic world than surviving evidence would indicate. Cicero, writing in the 1st century BC, casually mentions mechanical spheres built by Archimedes that showed the movements of the sun, moon, and planets. He describes these devices as impressive examples of Greek engineering skill, but not as miraculous or impossible achievements. Cicero was writing for Roman readers who apparently understood what such mechanisms were and how they functioned. His tone suggests these astronomical computers were sophisticated but not unprecedented. Even more intriguing, Cicero mentions that one of Archimedes' spheres had been brought to Rome as war booty when Syracuse fell to Roman forces in 259 BC-12 BC. This device reportedly demonstrated eclipse cycles and planetary motions through mechanical operation, functions nearly identical to what researchers have reconstructed for the Antikythera mechanism. The implication is that such devices were valuable enough to be specifically sought out and preserved as prestigious trophies. Archimedes himself had died during the siege of Syracuse, killed by a Roman soldier who apparently didn't recognize the elderly man drawing geometric figures in the sand. But his mechanical devices survived him, and were transported to Rome, where they became curiosities in the collections of wealthy Romans who appreciated Greek intellectual achievement even as they conquered Greek cities. This raises intriguing questions about the technological inheritance that Rome received from the Hellenistic world. The Romans were remarkable engineers in their own right, but their achievements focused on large-scale infrastructure projects, roads, aqueducts, amphitheatres, military machinery. They showed less interest in the kind of precision astronomical instruments that had flourished in Greek workshops. As a centre of learning and craftsmanship, Rhodes played a crucial role in sustaining the traditions that led to creations of this complexity. Hipparchus worked there in the 2nd century BC, making the astronomical observations that enabled him to discover precession and calculate the length of the solar year with stunning accuracy. But Hipparchus wasn't just a theoretical astronomer. Ancient sources describe him developing mechanical devices for predicting celestial events and coordinating calendar systems. Rhodes also had economic reasons for supporting sophisticated astronomical research. The island was a major commercial hub where accurate timekeeping and navigation were essential for coordinating Mediterranean trade. Merchants needed reliable methods for predicting seasonal weather patterns, calculating travel times, and synchronizing business activities across different regional calendar systems. Astronomical computers like the Antikythera mechanism would have had real practical value in such an environment. Encoded celestial information suggests Rhodes was the center where such a creation first took shape. The device's eclipse predictions are calculated for viewing from approximately the latitude of Rhodes. The calendar systems it coordinates match those used in the Eastern Aegean rather than mainland Greece. Even the constellation positions tracked by the mechanism correspond to observations made from Rhodes during the 1st century BC. This geographic specificity suggests that the Antikythera mechanism wasn't built as a generic astronomical tool, but was customized for use in a particular location by people familiar with local calendar traditions and observational practices. It was a precision instrument designed for a specific community of users who needed its particular combination of functions. But if Rhodes supported workshops capable of building devices like the Antikythera mechanism, where is the other evidence of this technological tradition? Why don't we find traces of the specialized tools needed for cutting precision gears? Where are the failed prototypes that any sophisticated manufacturing process would generate? What about the raw materials, the bronze ingots, the workshop debris that should mark sites where such devices were produced? These questions highlight one of the most challenging aspects of understanding ancient technology: the difference between what survives and what existed. Bronze corrodes completely under most environmental conditions. Precision tools wear out and get recycled. Workshop sites get built over or abandoned. The ephemeral traces of technological activity disappear far more readily than stone monuments or ceramic pottery. Consider what survives from modern precision engineering workshops. The products themselves might last decades, but the tooling, the prototypes, the manufacturing debris, the specialized equipment, most of it gets replaced, recycled, or discarded within years. If our civilization disappeared tomorrow, future archaeologists would find very little direct evidence of how we manufacture computer chips or precision mechanical devices, despite these being central technologies of our time. Ancient sources provide tantalizing hints about other sophisticated devices that apparently shared technological approaches with the Antikythera mechanism. Pliny the Elder, writing in the 1st century AD, describes automatic calendars and mechanical timekeepers that could coordinate multiple dating systems. Vitruvius mentions astronomical instruments that used gear trains to model celestial motions. These references suggest that precision mechanical devices were common enough to be mentioned casually in technical literature. The tradition of building mechanical astronomical models apparently extended back centuries before the Antikythera mechanism was created. Aristotle, writing in the 4th century BC, mentioned spheres that could demonstrate planetary motions through mechanical operation. Earlier still, some sources suggest that Babylonian astronomers had developed mechanical devices for calculating planetary positions and eclipse cycles. This longer timeline points to something particularly interesting about ancient technological development. The sophisticated engineering visible in the Antikythera mechanism wasn't the sudden achievement of individual genius. It was the latest development in a tradition of mechanical astronomical modelling that had been evolving for centuries across multiple cultures. In its mathematics, the device preserves evidence of knowledge built up over a lengthy period. The gear ratios don't just reproduce Greek astronomical calculations, they integrate observational data from Babylonian sources, Egyptian calendar traditions, and Greek theoretical innovations. The mechanism represents a synthesis of astronomical knowledge gathered from across the ancient Mediterranean world. But synthesizing this knowledge mechanically required more than just mathematical understanding. It demanded precision manufacturing capabilities that could translate complex numerical relationships into physical gear systems. The workshops that built devices like the Antikythera mechanism had to master both theoretical astronomy and practical metallurgy, both mathematical calculation and precision mechanical engineering. Having just one surviving piece of this tradition makes clear that ancient technology carried wisdom not always captured in text. Books can be copied and preserved across centuries, but mechanical knowledge requires hands-on transmission from master craftsmen to apprentices. When the workshop communities that maintained these traditions dispersed, the knowledge they preserved died with them. Recent analysis has identified additional functions of the Antikythera mechanism that suggest even broader technological capabilities. Some gear trains appear to track the 4-year Olympic cycle, coordinating athletic competitions with astronomical observations. Others may have modelled the 8-year cycle that governed certain religious festivals. The device wasn't just computing abstract astronomical relationships, it was integrating celestial mechanics with the social institutions that organised ancient Greek life. This integration of astronomical calculation with practical timekeeping reveals something important about how the ancient world understood the relationship between natural phenomena and human activities. The same device that could predict eclipses also tracked when religious festivals should be celebrated and athletic competitions held. Celestial mechanics and social organisation were understood as interconnected systems that could be modelled through the same mechanical principles. The precision required for these diverse functions points to manufacturing capabilities that we're only beginning to appreciate. The gear cutting had to be accurate enough to maintain astronomical precision over years of operation, but also robust enough to withstand the mechanical stresses of regular use. The bronze alloys had to resist corrosion while remaining workable with ancient tools. The assembly tolerances had to allow smooth operation while maintaining the tight mechanical relationships needed for accurate calculation. Attempts to rebuild the device with historically accurate methods have shown how difficult it is to match ancient precision. Contemporary craftsmen working with hand tools struggle to match the accuracy visible in the original bronze gears. The mathematical relationships are clear enough, but translating them into physical mechanisms that actually function reliably requires skills that apparently took generations to develop in the ancient world. These practical challenges illuminate why the technological tradition that created the Antikythera mechanism was so vulnerable to disruption. The knowledge needed to build such devices existed primarily in the specialized communities where theoretical astronomers worked alongside master craftsmen. When those communities dissolved under changing political and economic conditions, the accumulated wisdom of centuries vanished within a single generation. The device represents not just individual achievement, but the flowering of an entire technological ecosystem that supported collaborative innovation between different kinds of specialists. Mathematicians who could calculate complex astronomical relationships, bronze workers who could translate those calculations into physical gear systems, instrument makers who could assemble precision mechanisms that functioned reliably over extended periods. When we look at the Antikythera mechanism today, we're seeing the last surviving artifact of this remarkable technological tradition. A tradition sophisticated enough to produce mechanical computers 2 millennia before we supposedly invented them, yet fragile enough to disappear so completely that we're only rediscovering its existence through accidental preservation in the depth of the Mediterranean Sea. As imaging grows more powerful and analysis more refined, the gears continue to disclose their hidden stories, but each revelation only deepens the enigma of the lost workshops that produced practical tools to measure the cosmos. Between the disappearance of devices like the Antikythera Mechanism in the 1st century BC and the emergence of mechanical clocks in medieval Europe around 1300 AD, something extraordinary happened in the history of technology. For roughly 15 centuries, mechanical devices of comparable sophistication simply vanished from the archaeological record. Not gradually, but completely, as if the knowledge needed to build them had never existed. This gap in the technological record presents one of the most puzzling aspects of the Antikythera story. The Romans who conquered the Hellenistic kingdoms were themselves remarkable engineers. They built road systems that lasted millennia, aqueducts that supplied water across hundreds of miles, concrete domes that still stand today. Roman engineering achievements were monumental in scale and impressively durable, but they show no evidence of the precision mechanical devices that had apparently been common in Greek workshops just generations earlier. Roman technical literature reveals this shift in engineering priorities quite clearly. Vitruvius, writing his comprehensive guide to architecture and engineering around 30 BC, mentions astronomical instruments and mechanical devices almost in passing, as if they were curiosities rather than cutting-edge technology. His focus lies entirely on large-scale construction projects, theatres, temples, siege engines, water systems. The precision gear work that characterized Hellenistic astronomical computers simply doesn't appear in Roman technical traditions. This wasn't because the Romans lacked mechanical knowledge. They built sophisticated mill systems, developed advanced metallurgy, created complex lifting devices for construction projects. But their approach to technology emphasized scalability and durability over precision and miniaturization. Roman engineers built things to last centuries and serve thousands of people. Greek device makers had built instruments to perform precise calculations for small numbers of specialized users. Changes tied to Roman dominance reveal why lines of knowledge that once produced such devices eventually disappeared. The Hellenistic kingdoms had supported communities of scholars and craftsmen through royal patronage that valued intellectual achievement and technological innovation for their own sake. Roman society organized technical knowledge differently, focusing on practical applications that served military, administrative, or commercial needs. When Roman armies conquered places like Rhodes and Alexandria, they didn't deliberately destroy technological knowledge. They simply redirected it toward different purposes. Greek engineers became military consultants designing siege equipment. Astronomical scholars became civil servants calculating calendar reforms for Roman administrative convenience. The specialized workshops that had produced precision astronomical instruments lost their funding and their purpose. Worth considering how quickly specialized technological traditions can vanish when the social conditions that support them change. The knowledge needed to build devices like the Antikythera Mechanism wasn't encoded in books that could be copied and preserved in libraries. It existed primarily in the practiced skills of craftsmen who had spent decades learning to cut bronze gears with mathematical precision. When those workshop communities dispersed, they took irreplaceable practical knowledge with them. You can't learn precision gear cutting from written descriptions. It requires hands-on training from masters who understand the subtle relationship between tool angles, metal hardness, and cutting speed that produces uniformly spaced teeth. When the last practitioners of these techniques died without apprentices, centuries of accumulated engineering wisdom died with them. Continued need for expertise is what allows knowledge to endure across generations. As long as wealthy patrons valued sophisticated astronomical instruments, there was economic incentive to maintain the workshops that could build them. But Roman culture showed less interest in precision timekeeping devices and astronomical computers. Without market demand, the specialized production techniques simply became economically irrelevant. Clockwork did return in medieval Europe, though by means of a route that bore little resemblance to the original. The first mechanical clocks appeared in monastery towers around 1275 AD. driven by religious requirements for precise timing of prayers rather than astronomical observation. These early clocks used escapement mechanisms that controlled the release of energy from falling weights, a completely different engineering approach from the gear-train computers that had characterized Hellenistic astronomical devices. Interestingly, when European clockmakers did begin building astronomical clocks in the 14th and 15th centuries, they had to rediscover many of the same mathematical relationships that had been encoded in the Antikythera mechanism over a millennium earlier. The gear ratios needed to model lunar cycles, the mechanical solutions for variable orbital speeds, the integration of multiple calendar systems. All of this had to be worked out again from first principles. The famous astronomical clock in Prague, completed around 1410 AD, demonstrates capabilities that closely parallel those of the Antikythera mechanism. It tracks solar and lunar positions, predicts eclipses, displays zodiac information, and coordinates multiple calendar systems through mechanical computation. But the Prague clock required decades of development by teams of specialists working with the accumulated mathematical knowledge of medieval Islamic and European astronomy. That level of development time and institutional support suggests something important about the Antikythera mechanism. If medieval clockmakers needed decades to achieve similar capabilities working with advanced mathematical texts and established mechanical traditions, how long must the original Greek development have taken? How many generations of craftsmen refined the techniques needed to build the world's first analog computers? In the medieval period, the Islamic world safeguarded and expanded much of Greek astronomical knowledge, yet its mechanical devices still reveal striking gaps when compared with the earlier tradition. The elaborate automatic machines described by Al-Jazari in the 13th century demonstrate remarkable engineering skill, but they focus on entertainment and practical applications rather than astronomical calculation. The precision gear work that characterized Hellenistic astronomical computers doesn't appear in surviving Islamic mechanical devices. This suggests that the disappearance of traditions like those that created the Antikythera mechanism was more complete than just a transfer from Greek to Roman to Islamic culture. The specific combination of theoretical astronomy and precision mechanical engineering that flourished in the Hellenistic period seems to have vanished entirely, only to be independently redeveloped through different approaches centuries later. But the 15th century gap also highlights how our understanding of technological development depends on what happens to survive long enough for modern researchers to discover and interpret. Stone buildings endure across millennia. Ceramic pottery preserves well in most environments. Metal objects, especially those made from bronze or iron, corrode completely under normal conditions within centuries. If the Antikythera mechanism hadn't been preserved in the specific chemical environment of deep seawater, we would have no evidence that ancient Greeks could build mechanical computers. The device survived only because its particular burial conditions prevented the bronze corrosion that destroyed every other example of this technological tradition. This preservation bias shapes our understanding of ancient capabilities in ways that we rarely acknowledge. We know about Roman concrete because concrete structures survive for millennia. We know about Greek stone carving because marble endures across centuries, but we know almost nothing about ancient precision metalwork, textile manufacturing, or organic technologies because these materials decompose completely in most archaeological contexts. Lack of surviving examples might reflect what managed to endure rather than how common such devices truly were. Bronze astronomical computers could have been relatively common in Hellenistic cities, but common enough that their loss through corrosion wouldn't be noticed until modern analysis revealed what we had been missing. Another factor that might explain the technological gap involves the transmission of specialized knowledge across cultural boundaries. The Romans inherited the territories and libraries of the Hellenistic kingdoms, but they may not have inherited the workshop traditions that made devices like the Antikythera mechanism possible. Theoretical knowledge recorded in books can cross cultural boundaries easily, but practical manufacturing techniques require direct apprenticeship and hands-on training. When Roman priorities shifted away from precision astronomical instruments, there was no cultural mechanism for preserving the specialized craftsmanship that such devices required. The knowledge existed in the practice skills of individual craftsmen, rather than in institutional records that could be maintained across political transitions. Across the medieval period, monastic communities became guardians of old knowledge. but their efforts focused far more on copying text than on sustaining technological practices. Monks copied Greek mathematical and astronomical works, but they weren't necessarily interested in building the mechanical devices those texts described. The preservation system that saved ancient literature wasn't designed to maintain ancient engineering practices. This creates a puzzle for understanding the relationship between theoretical knowledge and practical capability in ancient societies. Medieval European scholars had access to many of the same astronomical texts that had informed the builders of the Antikythera Mechanism. They could read about gear ratios for modelling celestial cycles and mechanical methods for predicting eclipses, but having access to theoretical descriptions isn't the same as possessing the manufacturing skills needed to build functional devices. The 15th century gap between the Antikythera Mechanism and comparable medieval devices suggests that sophisticated technological traditions can disappear completely even when the theoretical knowledge that underlies them remains available. The practical skills needed to translate mathematical relationships into working mechanical systems apparently proved far more fragile than the mathematical knowledge itself. Recent discoveries continue to complicate our understanding of this technological disappearance. Archaeologists occasionally uncover corroded metal objects from late Roman and early medieval contexts that show evidence of precision mechanical work. Most of these finds are too damaged to identify definitively, but they raise the possibility that some traditions of sophisticated metalworking may have persisted longer than the main historical record suggests. The Byzantine Empire, which preserved much of the Eastern Roman world through the medieval period, maintained some connections to ancient Greek intellectual traditions. Byzantine texts occasionally mention mechanical devices and astronomical instruments, though surviving examples are rare and generally less sophisticated than the Hellenistic precedents. But even these fragmentary survivals point to something important about technological continuity across historical transitions. Knowledge doesn't always disappear completely. Sometimes it contracts into smaller communities, becomes less visible to mainstream culture, or adapts to changed circumstances in ways that obscure its origins. The story of the Antikythera Mechanism's technological context suggests that human knowledge develops in more complex patterns than the linear progression we often assume. Sophisticated capabilities can emerge, flourish, and then retreat so completely that later civilizations have to rediscover what was once commonplace. The 15th century silence between ancient mechanical computers and medieval clockwork represents not just the loss of specific devices, but the dissolution of entire communities of knowledge that had taken centuries to develop. Understanding this pattern changes how we interpret both ancient achievements and modern innovations. Some of what we consider uniquely contemporary technological sophistication might actually represent the rediscovery of capabilities that existed in different forms during earlier periods of history. The Antikythera Mechanism stands as a reminder that technological progress isn't always cumulative. Sometimes the most important innovations are the ones we have to invent twice. Standing in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens today, looking at the corroded bronze fragments of the Antikythera Mechanism, you're witnessing something that challenges fundamental assumptions about how human knowledge develops across time. This device wasn't supposed to exist, yet here it sits, quietly forcing us to reconsider everything we thought we understood about ancient technological capabilities and the nature of progress itself. Attempts to rebuild the device today carry their own fascinating lesson in technological humility. When contemporary clockmakers and precision engineers attempt to build working replicas of the Antikythera Mechanism using tools and techniques available to ancient craftsmen, they consistently struggle to match the accuracy visible in the original bronze gears. Master craftsmen with decades of experience in precision metalwork find themselves humbled by the sophisticated engineering solutions that anonymous Greek workshops had apparently perfected 2,000 years ago. These reconstruction projects reveal something profound about the relationship between theoretical knowledge and practical capability. We can read the ancient mathematical texts that describe astronomical cycles and gear ratio calculations. We understand the principles behind analog computation and mechanical modelling of celestial motions, but translating that theoretical understanding into working devices that actually function reliably requires skills that apparently took generations to develop in the ancient world. Rebuilding efforts reached their peak when specialists from diverse backgrounds collaborated to recover not just the ancient science, but also the techniques of manufacture. This collaborative approach mirrors what must have characterized the original Hellenistic workshops, where theoretical astronomers worked directly with precision craftsmen to create devices that integrated abstract mathematical relationships with physical mechanical systems. But even with modern tools and comprehensive theoretical understanding, contemporary reconstructions rarely achieve the operational smoothness visible in the corroded fragments of the original device. The ancient craftsmen had solved manufacturing problems that continue to challenge modern precision engineering. They had developed techniques for cutting uniform gear teeth, maintaining assembly tolerances, and creating durable mechanical relationships that we're still working to fully understand. The astronomical accuracy of the mechanism becomes even more impressive when tested against historical records. Researchers have used reconstructed versions to calculate eclipse dates, planetary positions, and calendar correspondences for ancient periods, then compared these mechanical predictions with documented observations from Greek, Roman, and Babylonian sources. The matches are precise enough to suggest that the original device would have been reliable for practical astronomical work across decades of operation. This level of long-term accuracy required not just sophisticated initial design, but also systematic maintenance and calibration procedures. The evidence of repairs visible in the original fragments suggests that ancient users understood how to keep the mechanism functioning properly over extended periods. They had developed not just the skills to build complex mechanical devices, but also the knowledge needed to maintain them as precision instruments. Recent analysis continues to reveal new aspects of the mechanism's sophistication that push ancient technological capabilities further beyond conventional expectations. High-resolution CT scanning has identified gear trains that may have modelled the retrograde motions of Mars and Venus as they appear to move backward against the star field during specific portions of their orbital cycles. These planetary anomalies represented some of the most challenging problems in ancient astronomy, yet the mechanism appears to have solved them through pure mechanical computation. Other newly discovered functions suggest the device integrated astronomical calculation with practical social applications in ways that reveal the deep connection between celestial observation and daily life in the ancient world. Gear systems tracked not just abstract astronomical cycles, but also the timing of religious festivals, athletic competitions, and seasonal activities that were coordinated with celestial events. This integration challenges modern assumptions about the separation between scientific knowledge and practical application. The Antikythera Mechanism wasn't built as a theoretical demonstration or an academic exercise. It was designed as a working tool that could answer real questions about time, seasons, and celestial events that mattered for organizing ancient society. At its core, the artifact speaks to an ancient view of knowledge as inseparable from the workings of the cosmos. Rather than viewing astronomy as an abstract mathematical discipline, they approached celestial mechanics as a practical problem that could be solved through physical modelling. The mechanism embodies a philosophy that sees understanding and building as complementary activities rather than separate intellectual pursuits. But the deeper implications of the Antikythera mechanism extend beyond questions of ancient technological capability. The device forces us to confront how much of what we consider uniquely modern innovation might actually represent the rediscovery of approaches that flourished in earlier periods under different cultural conditions. The analog computing techniques visible in the mechanism anticipate by 2 millennia the mathematical methods that characterize pre-digital calculation. The integration of multiple data streams through mechanical processing parallels approaches that define modern computer systems. The miniaturization of complex functions into portable devices reflects design priorities that we associate with contemporary technology. These parallels don't suggest that ancient Greeks had somehow anticipated modern technological development. Rather, they indicate that certain fundamental approaches to solving complex problems emerge independently when the right combination of theoretical knowledge and practical skills exists within supportive cultural contexts. Fragility of the tradition that produced such devices offers a sobering reminder of how swiftly advanced skills can disappear from human history. The precision engineering techniques, the astronomical calculation methods, the mechanical design principles, all of it disappeared so completely that medieval Europeans had to rediscover basic gear cutting techniques from scratch when they began building mechanical clocks centuries later. This technological amnesia wasn't caused by catastrophic destruction or deliberate suppression. It resulted from the gradual dissolution of the specific communities where theoretical knowledge and practical skills had been integrated through generations of collaborative development. When those communities dispersed under changing political and economic pressures, the accumulated wisdom they had preserved simply evaporated. The pattern repeats throughout history in ways that suggest technological development is far more contingent than we typically recognize. Sophisticated capabilities emerge within particular cultural contexts, flourish while those contexts remain stable, then disappear when the social and economic arrangements that supported them change. Knowledge that seems secure and permanent can prove remarkably fragile when the communities that maintain it are disrupted. Even our own era of technology faces fragile points of failure that often go unacknowledged. Digital storage systems depend on continuously maintained infrastructure and compatible hardware. Contemporary manufacturing techniques rely on complex supply chains and specialized industrial knowledge. The social institutions that support advanced technology today could prove as historically contingent as the Hellenistic workshops that created the Antikythera Mechanism. The device reminds us that human technological capability doesn't always follow the smooth upward trajectory that our narratives of progress suggest. Instead of steady accumulation, we see cycles of development and loss, innovation and forgetting, achievement and amnesia that challenge comfortable assumptions about how knowledge develops over time. Perhaps most importantly, the Antikythera Mechanism demonstrates that absence of evidence isn't always evidence of absence. The fact that we can't find archaeological traces of ancient technologies doesn't necessarily mean those technologies never existed. Sometimes the most sophisticated achievements of earlier civilizations survive in forms too fragmentary to recognize, or disappear completely due to preservation conditions beyond our investigative methods. The corroded bronze gears continue to yield new insights as analysis techniques improve, but they've already taught us something crucial about the relationship between past and present. They've shown us that ancient peoples were capable of achievements we never imagined, that technological sophistication and technological survival are entirely different phenomena, and that our understanding of human history might be fundamentally shaped by the accidents of what time has preserved for us to discover. The Antikythera Mechanism sits in its museum case as more than just an ancient artifact. It's evidence that the past was stranger and more sophisticated than we've been willing to acknowledge. A reminder that human ingenuity has always been capable of transcending the limitations we retrospectively impose on earlier civilizations. In its silent bronze complexity, the device continues to turn invisible gears in our imagination, measuring not just ancient astronomical cycles, but the distance between what we think we know about human history and what actually was. A message from a vanished world that possessed knowledge we're only beginning to rediscover, transmitted across 2 millennia in the language of precision engineering and mathematical bronze. Lessons from this artifact invite a more humble perspective on what civilizations can accomplish and how easily it can be lost. To recognize that the technologies we consider impossible for earlier periods might reflect our assumptions more than ancient limitations. To understand that the innovations we consider uniquely modern might be variations on approaches that have emerged and disappeared multiple times throughout human history. Tonight we've explored one small bronze device that survived against impossible odds to reach us from the depths of time. But perhaps the real message of the Antikythera Mechanism isn't about ancient Greek engineering at all. It's about the provisional nature of everything we think we know about the development of human knowledge itself.